Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron,
And I'm Brett.
and you're listening to The Last Alliance, a Rings of Power podcast.
We know it's a dangerous business going out your door or when choosing a podcast, but we're glad you've joined our adventure as we discuss The Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power.
And so it begins.
Pull up a chair and join us as we look back at Episode 1, A Shadow of the Past. We'll offer a crash course on the first stage of Middle-earth, talk about our impressions of the episode, and discuss the overarching themes that define this episode and the rest of the season. Let's jump right in, and we'll talk about the good, the bad, and the great of Episode 1, A Shadow of the Past. I'll start off. This is a segment where we each identify three things: what we thought was good, bad, and great about the first episode. We'll start off with the good things. I'll go first. I loved how the episode used the Tolkien map to orient the audience where all the scenes were taking place. We had Valinor, we had a pan over to Middle Earth, we have the Southlands, we have Rovanion, Mythland, where the elves are. I thought that was a really cool technique. And for Tolkien fans and for fans of the map, it was a really cool way to orient ourselves.
Yeah, Malcolm, I agree. I don't know about you, but when I read books like this that are so epic, or shows or movies or whatever, it's always very helpful to. I always find myself like, okay, he's mentioned like 4 locations here. Where are they in relation to each other? How long is it taking these guys to walk from point A to point B? And all that kind of stuff. So yeah, geographical reference was definitely a great idea. Yeah, I'm gonna have a hard time with this whole series with hobbits because I know it's an essential part of this whole thing and the whole storyline, but in none of the books or movies am I a particular fan of any of the hobbit creatures.
Let's just clarify that, Cameron.
Go ahead, yeah.
You just hate
I
goodness.
hate short people. No,
Well,
that's not it. No, it's just like, when you're watching the movies or whatever, and it goes to, I'm of the, group that when it goes to a Frodo scene, next, skip. Back when they had DVDs and you could skip scenes. Yeah, Frodo scenes were skipped 100% of the time. And it's like, yeah, I understand that they're an essential part of the story and we'll talk about them here. Yeah, to me, it's just like, it's not as interesting as what the rest of the characters are doing in the story.
fair enough.
Yeah, so my good, I thought, and we all know how much Amazon spent on this series, which I'm glad they did. But I thought it paid off in the imagery and the scenes that they portrayed. I thought that, especially there at the beginning when they were kind of depicting the First Age and Valinor and all that kind of stuff, I thought they did a great job portraying with great imagery what Valinor looked like, what the trees might have looked like. And, it started great, and I think it just kept going as the episode went on. So I thought that was a good thing.
And I think we'll see later on in later episodes when we start getting up close and personal with the orcs, and we've moved away from the Hobbit trilogy of complete CGI and gone back to now just this really intense makeup and costuming, and I love to see it. Bad. Okay, there was a character right at the beginning. I don't even know his name, but he was like Galadriel's little foot soldier servant dude. And from the get-go, I don't know if he has like a major crush on Galadriel, but he just bugs the heck out of me. comes up to her. They're hunting Sauron up in the north, and they're in a blizzard. It looks pretty miserable. It sounds like they've been there for a couple hundred years hunting. And he comes up to her and whispers in her ear, "Perhaps we should camp here for tonight." And it's just like, dude, back up. And then, by the end of the episode, Galadriel's on her way back to Valinor. She's accepted this gift from the king, and foot soldier dude, Galadriel, take my hand. And he's just this weird looking dude, like doesn't deserve
Galadriel. Just to be clear who we're talking about, you're talking about the guy who initiated the mutiny, right?
Yes. Yeah, which was also kind of weird, I thought too. Like, I don't know. Galadriel's got this band of like 6 soldiers, and I feel like she could have taken them all out if she really wanted to.
Okay, because another weird elf on that boat was the dude who just spontaneously started singing and then found himself towards the front of the boat and was just getting drawn in. So I didn't know if you're talking about him or not.
No, I'm not.
The mutiny guy, gotcha.
Yeah. But other than that, like the actual boat scene, I thought was good. But this guy, just weird. I don't think we see him again. If we do, it's too much. So.
All right. What do you think, though, the message was with the analogy?
Keep your head up.
Or was there one?
There was supposed to be one. Something about finding the light and looking towards the right direction.
And I think we get there eventually by the end of the episode, right? We see that there's this constant struggle with Galadriel and stuff that even ties back into her role in the Lord of the Rings, right? So there's this constant battle between going back to the heaven place of Valinor versus the struggle to go and find the darkness, the Lord of the Darkness, and hunt him down and eradicate him from the world.
Yeah, and I do think you bring up a good theme of Lord of the Rings in general, but it's especially highlighted in this series of the symbolism of light and, it being something that, gives us knowledge and gives us power and fuels us and stuff like that. So, my bad. Let's see. So many, no, just kidding. I just thought that a lot of, and we'll get to this later, but I thought that in this first episode in particular, they threw out a lot of terms and names that if you had just watched the Lord of the Rings movies and the Hobbit movies, you would not necessarily know what those were. And we'll get into those later on, but I guess that was my bad. And what I remember when I first watched this episode, I was like, it's awesome that you guys are talking about all this, but at the same time, I was on, this was before I had read the Silmarillion, and I was on Google the whole episode, like, what's this? What's that? So that's my bad.
Yeah, and we'll get into that more. Interesting that it paralleled Lord of the Rings with kind of this opening prologue. And I don't know why it seemed like the Lord of the Rings prologue seemed so much more comprehensible, digestible. This one just sped through a couple thousand years in like 2 minutes. And, I'm with you.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of Sauron, that's my great this week with this episode. He gets maybe 7 seconds of screen time, but I love that he is the main character of this episode. The whole time there is just this sense of he's out there. Where is he? We got to find him. There's his sigil that's being burned into everything. Theo finds his sigil in the Southlands in the bottom of some barn. Galadriel's brother, thousands of years earlier, got burned by this sign of Sauron, and she's on the hunt for him. We've got this mysterious crater coming in with who knows who is on it. Sauron it gives me a lot of hope that this series is going to be about Sauron, and it's quite exciting because even in Lord of the Rings, like you didn't really see a whole lot of him, and the focus really was on the Fellowship. But here it seems like there's going to be a lot of intrigue and mystery with Sauron. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, they did a really good job of establishing him versus Galadriel at the center of gravity of this series. My great minus Brett's elf that he hates, his mutinous boyfriend, was just the casting and the character development. I thought a lot was done in just the first episode of establishing, and we've already talked about this a little bit with Sauron and Galadriel, of just establishing, who these characters are, and I thought that the people playing those characters fit their roles very well. And I think that it gets even better as the season goes on. So that was my great for this episode.
Well, let's dive in now. We mentioned that there's a whole lot of backstory and really a whole age worth of backstory that we get for about 3 or 4 minutes. So, Cameron, why don't you kind of help us out? Give us a brief crash course on the first stage of Middle Earth and what we need to know, what others need to know to find their place here in the Rings of Power series.
Yeah, so we'll keep this pretty brief. Like I said earlier, there was just a lot of terms and names thrown out there that, at least when I was watching it for the first time, having only watched the movies at that point, I was pretty confused as to what was going on or what these things meant, and definitely wanted to know more because I'm a huge fan. So ended up going and reading the Silmarillion, which if you want all the details or a lot of the details, you can go and read that. We are not going to dive into that great of detail here. But if you have any questions, you can definitely submit them, and we can respond and talk about them. But yeah, I think that I think the simplest way to start out is kind of just talking about the overall creation in general terms, the big building blocks of this Lord of the Rings universe. So there is like the creator, his name is Iluvatar, and then the different levels of beings, the top tier being what they call the Valar, and then the next tier being what they call the Maiar, next tier Eldar, which you're familiar with, the next tier being men. So those are all of the creations of this guy, this creator Iluvatar. A side note is that dwarves and orcs are not actually created by Iluvatar. They are created by some of the Valar and allowed to survive and persist by Iluvatar. So
clearly, the lesser races.
Yeah. Well, dwarves are probably a little bit better than men as far as capability, right? But yeah, so to just give you a couple examples of each one, we'll do the Valar at the end, but some of the Maiar that are notable are all the wizards. So Gandalf is a Maiar, so are Sauron and the blue wizards and the brown wizard. Also, Sauron is a Maiar or a Maya.
And what could we compare these to? Are these like angels? Are these like demigods?
Yeah, so if you want to take like I guess you could compare it to Greek mythology, maybe. So what do you guys think? Like, because yeah, the Valar are like who would you say? The gods of Mount Olympus, the Maiar are the demigods, but then what does that make the Eldar? Like the demigods? Because
So the Maiar are servants, supernatural servants to the gods.
I don't think that they are bound to them. I think that they just, of their own free will, partner up with the Valar, and they have their favorites, and the Valar have their favorite Maya, and they just end up working together. I don't think it's like a servant master relationship, because it when you read the books, it makes it sound like they have a choice to ditch this one for another one, and or just flat out be on their own, because there are a lot of Maya that are on their own, and even some that have married elves. And so it's not a for every Maya there is a Valar and their slaves or whatever.
I think the example that we're probably familiar with is like Gandalf and Sauron, wizards sent to Middle Earth to handle the problem of Sauron. Saruman decides, nope, I'm going to team up with Sauron, or at least try to overthrow that. So he essentially is, well, he's not viewed very favorably by the Valar anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, initially they were sent by the Valar, right? And then like you said, he breaks off on his own. So yeah, there you go. So yeah, that's some Maya that are. Oh, another one that's interesting, just a little Easter egg, is a Balrog is actually a Maya also that was corrupted by Morgoth, and that brings us into who is Morgoth. So Morgoth is a Valar. He's kind of like the um he was an intentional creation by Iluvatar, but he's kind of the negative Nancy of the world. He hates the goodness and the light, and hates to see the party. If you want to make a Greek mythology reference, he's the Hades of the bunch. And yeah, he decides after not too long of hanging out in the light and the party that he's not about it, and tries to destroy it several times. So that kind of brings us to another point of the light, right? So we see in the episode the trees. There's two trees, and for a time they produce all the light. Like there is no sun and moon at that point. Before them, there was two lamps, one at each pole. We don't really need to talk about that a whole lot, but Morgoth destroyed those, and then the rest of the Valar made these trees, and now they, have the light back in the form of these trees. All right, so Morgoth is like, I still hate the light and all the happiness you guys are having over there. So he recruits this creature that at least I don't really know, but I don't think anyone really knows what type of being it is, but Ungoliant is the name of the creature. It's a spider shaped creature, kind of the ancestor of the spider that you see in the cave with Frodo.
Isn't that
It,
isn't that Shelob, the spider's mother, Ungoliant?
Yes. I
yes,
believe
right.
in the book that Shelob is called the spawn of Ungoliant.
Ungoliant, yeah, and they mention that in the movies as well. So whether it's her mother or great 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 grandmother, who knows? But yeah, descendant of, right. So Ungoliant's like main purpose in life is to just suck everything dry, pretty much, right? Uh, and so Morgoth brings her over to Valinor, sets her up by the trees, she just starts sucking the life and the light out of them
And so that's what we see in the episode. This reference
when
the
they go
lines
dark.
come out.
Yep, exactly, exach. And this happens while they're all having a celebration elsewhere in Valinor. All the Valar and the Eldar are having a little celebration elsewhere, and the trees are kind of by themselves, and Morgoth strikes, right? All right, last thing I kind of want to say with Morgoth and the light is kind of what brings the elves into this war in the first place. So the elves, contrary to popular belief from the series and the movie, do not actually originate from Valinor. They originate in Middle Earth and were brought to Valinor by the Valar. And they lived there for a very long time. And they loved the light of the trees and everything about it. Thought the Valar were the coolest things they had ever seen, which they probably were. And some of these elves decided that they were going to make jewels that contained the light of these trees, also known as the Cimmerils, which is what that Cimmerillion book is all about. Um, anyway, after the trees were destroyed, Morgoth also went and stole these Cimmerils. And the elves were seeking vengeance after this. A lot of them swore blood oaths that they would not rest until Morgoth was dead and they had the Cimmerils back in their possession. And that's what led all of these elves over to Middle Earth to try and vanquish Morgoth.
I think that's extremely helpful. Already I'm going through my mind, and a couple episodes later in the season, we get all these references back to Morgoth, or talking about the Silmarils and why they were so sought after, and provides really helpful context. Going back to your point of it was just missing from the first episode, and those references are kind of empty without the context of the first age. And there was some really epic stuff that happened in the first stage. We had flying ships. We had, this battle with the giant spider, this giant god. The elves somehow take down. There's a whole nother story. Again, just to emphasize, the Rings of Power is about the second age, and the Lord of the Rings is about the third age. So
yep. So to kind of cap off the discussion on the light. So the trees were pretty much gone. However, there was one fruit and one leaf from each of the trees that was left that still had light in it. The Valar took those last remnants and made them into the sun and the moon. So yeah, the rest of that first age is basically the war with Morgoth, or as his other name is Melkor. So, and Sauron is his helper. And the Eldar try and go over and fight alone. Obviously, they're not, hand-to-hand combat with Morgoth right at the outset. They're fighting all of his servants. So orcs are part of it. Balrog is part of it, right? And they're just doing this war. Finally get to a point where they realize the Valar need to step in and finish off Morgoth, or we're never going to win this war. So the rest of the Valar come over. They defeat Morgoth and they throw him basically into jail in Valinor called the Halls of Mandos. All right, so Morgoth is still alive. He's not dead. He's just trapped. All right.
He's like a spiritual being, a spirit. His spirit lives on, right?
Yep. Yeah. So, just like Gandalf, when he died, he came back. These guys are eternal beings, the Valar and the Maiar. So when they lose their physical bodies or whatever, they go to this Halls of Mandos place, which is just like the jail, the purgatory, the prison of Valinor. So let's see. Any other little tidbits about that? Also, like I said, some of the elves, well, none of the elves originated in Valinor. They all originated in the main continent, Middle Earth. However, not all the elves came to Valinor. So some of the elves, or also known as the Gray Elves or the Dark Elves or the Sylvan Elves, they all stayed behind. And I think that that's why they kind of prefer the. You'll notice in the movies the light of the stars more so than any others, because that's kind of the main thing they had staying behind. But these guys are Legolas and his group in the forest are all gray elves or sylvan elves.
Arondir we meet in episode
Yep,
1.
exactly. And these guys definitely eternal beings and powerful beings, but not having basked in the light of the trees, and the Valar are not nearly as powerful as the elves from Valinor, like Galadriel and the High King.
Very good. Let's go on to a segment that I've called, for the time being, There and Back Again, where we highlight for everyone things maybe that you may have missed, things that call back to the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits movies, Easter egg type of things. As I've watched this season several times, each time I watch it, it seems like something else clicks. The first thing for me was just the opening. I think anybody who's watched The Lord of the Rings several times can almost quote the opening. It's Galadriel's voice, and she says, "The world has changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it." It's this very dark and ominous little speech, this introduction to this epic story. Rings of Power, similarly, we get this black screen and we hear the voice of Galadriel, and it's a totally different tone. This time it's, "Nothing is evil in the beginning, and there was a time when the world was so young there had not yet been a sunrise. But even then there was light." And we get the beautiful scene with the river, and then we talk about that a little bit.
And what a great, sorry to cut you off, but what a great succinct uh, you know, sentence to encapsulate so much of the series, because the bit about, nothing is evil in the beginning, that applies across the board, right? That includes even Morgoth, and, as you find out later on, even Sauron, in the Lord of the Rings, is just this bottomless pit of pure evil. And find out in this series that that's not quite his only
Identity.
characteristic. Yeah, identity.
Yeah. I love the contrast here. It shows a much younger Galadriel. We see her in her younger years, very innocent, drawn to the light, compared to that with the Lord of the Rings Galadriel. We have that, has this scene where we kind of see this multiple personality, this dark queen version. She starts yelling at Frodo of how she would rule if she had the ring, and we see that there's been thousands of years of trauma thrust upon her, and I think it's going to be really cool to see how the rest of her character develops over the season.
Yeah.
You guys are familiar with people. It's almost a meme now. Why couldn't they take the eagles just straight to the mountain and drop? I love that the producers called that out right at the beginning. In the War of Wrath scenes, there's this epic shot of one of the fell beasts, the dragons that the Nazgul ride, just chowing down on an eagle and crashing it into an army, and just going down on this eagle, just shutting down those rumors.
I remember watching that, and at first, at least for me, at first you don't realize that it's an eagle, and you see this thing crashing and burning out of the sky, and you think it's a Nazgul because eagles don't die, right? But then you take a second look, and you're like, "Holy crap, that's an eagle! What what did that?"
It's a Middle Earth eagle, which means it's like a friggin' giant eagle. Um, One thing that I caught immediately the first time that I saw it, they're hunting Sauron in Utumno, I think is the name. This palace fortress of Morgoth, and they it's way up in the north. They've been hunting for hundreds of years, and they get there, and it's freezing cold, and they light torches, and they're going around, and what's his name? I found him. Thondir. What a name. Thondir, Galadriel's crush. Uh, he says, I can't feel, I must have lost feeling in my hand. I can't feel the warmth from the torch. And Galadriel says, this place is so evil, our torches give off no warmth. And she says, this way. And the guy says, how do you know? Kind of harking back to Gandalf in the Mines of Moria. How do you know it's this way? And she says, it's colder than the rest. So there's this idea, this theme that evil can be so evil that it just gets rid of all the warmth. And we see that in Lord of the Rings when Gandalf, throws the ring into the fire at Bag End and says, hold out your hand, Frodo. It's quite cool. And puts the scalding ring in his palm. And yeah, it's cool. So this idea that cool things that are evil can get rid of warmth. And we see it come up in later episodes, and we can talk about it more. But that was an interesting theme that they chose to highlight. It was a split second. You may have missed it, but we got a glimpse of some Entings and Entwives when the meteor comes flying in. About a half a second on the screen. Maybe we'll get a storyline of and learn where all the Entwives went. Treebeard tells us that he lost them a long time ago.
Yeah, somebody needs to point Treebeard in that direction, obviously.
Go hunt down that meteor site and start from there. Yeah, Treebeard's been around a while. Yeah. And then just this is just talking about the three elven rings. I guess this is just context for those who maybe don't know, but the ring bearers, really the elves are the only ones who we know of the identities of all of the rings of power that were given to dwarves and to men. Really, the elves are the only ones we know who were the ring bearers. We know that Gil-galad held a ring that he eventually gave to Elrond, both of whom we meet in the episode. Galadriel is a ring bearer from the beginning, and Círdan, he's an elf king. He's the shipwright who oversees the Grey Havens and people sailing back to Valinor. He eventually gives his ring to Gandalf when Gandalf comes to town, recognizing that Gandalf will have much more use of it than he will. Each of these rings have properties that help restore, help to heal. In the case of the ring that Gandalf has, it helps to inspire hope in others. So it's interesting. We talk about the rings of power and what this series is going to be about. We know that we've already seen in episode 1 several of these ring bearers for the elven rings. It will be interesting to see what comes of the dwarven and the rings for the men, because we know nothing about those really. So something to look forward to.
Yeah, and we'll get into, I assume, a pretty in-depth conversation about the rings when we do the last episode recap as well. So
yeah, which I thought was a very exciting finale. Can't wait to get to that.
All right, sweet. So our final segment is called Not All Wander. Sorry. Our final segment is called Not All Who Wander Are Lost.
Is it not all or
All right,
not
so
all those? It's not all those.
as I was saying, our final segment of today's episode, we're going to talk about, it's entitled Not All Those Who Wander Are Lost. So we're just kind of going over each episode, kind of the lessons gleaned from the episode, or what the characters are trying to outline or highlight. So one of the things that I particularly thought was pretty profound from this episode is when Galadriel is talking to Elrond. There, she says that when they get back to Linden, she says, "Evil does not sleep, Elrond. It waits, and in the moment of our complacency, it blinds us." And I think that is Galadriel to the T, right? She is always ready. She is always suspicious. She is always, on the lookout for the next whiff of evil that she can crush. You see that in the Hobbit movies too, where, Gandalf takes, what little suspicions he has to that council, and Saruman and Elrond are kind of easily dissuaded, while Galadriel's like, "No,
What's going on?
let's investigate." Yep. So, and I just think it's very applicable also to the real world, right? Evil does not sleep; it waits until the moment of our complacency, and exactly, it's mo. So,
She kind of gives Elrond lashing there. Like that's, this is their real confrontation. And you see Galadriel means business. Elrond, he's like, I've seen lots of war. She's like, no, you have not seen what I have seen. You have not seen what I have seen.
Yeah, and in the movies, you kind of get that hint that Galadriel is, more impressive than Elrond, but without reading the books and just watching the movies, you don't think that there's that big of a difference between the two, right? But in fact, there is quite a bit of difference, and we'll get more into that also as we go forward in this season. But Brett, you want to take the next one?
Yeah. So the Harfoots, your favorite company,
Yes.
we're introduced to their way of life, very different from Galadriel. Their motto is nobody goes off trail, nobody walks alone. We're not going to do anything different or scary or adventurous or risky at all. We're going to make the safest decisions all the time, whatever preserves, our ability to stay hidden from the outside world. They're not interested in seeking out danger. We've got, of course, the rebellious Nori Brandyfoot, who is kind of the Bilbo / Frodo role of this company, who's kind of ignoring that rule, pushing the boundaries. This motto kind of takes a turn, kind of a dark turn. We find out a couple episodes later that maybe things aren't so hunky dory with this nobody goes off trail, nobody walks alone, unless you're a hindrance to the company. And we'll talk about that some more.
Exactly. It's a nice little jingle. And yeah, nobody walks alone unless you get left behind.
That's exactly right. And so kind of funny how that turns out. It's kind of important, so we'll learn more.
I'm glad they put a lot of quality time into the writing and the production here, because I mean, yeah, you can. There's things to criticize, of course, just like with anything, but all in all, I think they did a very good job.
Can we talk about real fast Finrod, Galadriel's brother's response when she asks, how do I know which lights to follow, and kind of whispers into her ear, like, oh, I wonder what he said. And then we get to the end of the episode, and she's about to make it back into Valinor, which apparently is a one-way ticket. And we cut back to Finrod, and he says, sometimes we have to touch the darkness to know which lights are which lights to follow. And then we see Galadriel jumping into the water, just like the rock that dove into the water instead of the ship that looks up to see the light. We're kind of tied back to this. How do we feel about that statement from Finrod? Do we agree? Sometimes you have to touch the darkness.
I think that, yeah, the darkness is there to contrast the light and give value to the light. Do you need to seek out the darkness to know the light? I don't know. I think it will just come when the sun goes down. But obviously, Galadriel felt that way, and she was kind of being forced into a situation where she didn't have a choice to be able to follow the light that she wanted to follow or that she thought she should follow. So I don't know if it was her. I mean, obviously that's what they were trying to portray, but I guess in my interpretation of it, I don't think that was her necessarily touching the darkness in that moment as it was chasing a different light.
I think there is a fair amount of darkness in Galadriel. We see it come out in Lord of the Rings.
In Lord of the Rings, yeah.
And that may just be a product of centuries of hunting Sauron.
Well, and you see it a little bit even at the end of this series when Sauron tries to get her,
Yep.
So
there's that little bit too from Gil-galad talking to Elrond, which makes me think that they were both kind of in on this plot to get Galadriel out of Middle Earth, ship her back to Valinor. And Gil-galad says, yeah, sometimes the wind that seeks to blow out the fire just causes it to spread even more. And will Galadriel's persistence end up making things worse? And we find out a little bit about that even, in the next couple episodes.
Yep. All right, well, I think that wraps us up for this episode. Thank you guys for joining us as we recapped episode 1. Hope you'll join us next time as we discuss episode 2, Adrift.
Thank you for joining our fellowship on this episode of The Last Alliance, a Rings of Power podcast.
And if you enjoyed this episode even half as well as you should have liked, or liked half of it half as well as it deserved, please subscribe, comment, and share.
We'll see you next time.